Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Teaching English webinar for teacher educators. This month, our guest is Dr. Ivana Aleksic, who is the school leadership lead at the British Council. And we will take a closer look at the results of the OECD Teaching and Learning International Survey 2018 results. So my name is Shirin Soyuz, and I'll be your moderator today. Thank you all so much for joining this live event. Before we start the session, I'd like to share a number of quick housekeeping reminders with you. So while waiting, please share with us in the Q&A where you are from. If you work in pre-service teacher education, type pre-service. If you work in service, type in-service in the Q&A. So during this session, you will have a chance to ask questions. Please use the Q&A to ask our presenter your questions. We will use the chat only for announcements. And the link to the certificate will be provided in the thank you email that you will receive in the next couple of days. And finally, this session is being recorded, and a recording of the webinar will be available on Teaching English in the next couple of days. So let me introduce our presenter today. Ivana Aleksic is a public policy and education specialist and excuse me, holds a PhD in education policies. She currently works for the British Council as school leadership lead, focusing on education reforms in low and middle income countries. Hi, Ivana, great to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks. So I'm going to take a few seconds to get to the PowerPoint presentation. Could you let me know if the slides are visible?
Yes, we can see. Thank you, Ivana.
Okay. Thank you very much. So welcome, everybody. I'm quite happy to be here today talking to you about the professional lives of teachers from their own perspective. The topic is actually slightly narrower than the title suggests, but I'm hoping to take you to a journey that I'm now going to illustrate by presenting the structure of this presentation. We're talking about a topic which is of high interest globally. And because we will be talking and relying mostly on data, comparative, cross-country comparative data, we thought that it would be good to start by shedding some light on the global context in which this data is collected, making sure that we understand both geographic coverage, but also the meaning of the time point when this data set that we will be discussing was collected. We also have had some important, strategically important years when monitoring on the progress of quality of education or a mandate is coming to an end. We'll talk about that a little bit later. That's why there's the reference to 2030 that's coming up. And really, one of the elements that we wanted to strongly emphasize is always going behind the data, understanding how those are generated and who owns them, to be able to actually interpret those in a good way. So clearly, we want to talk about teachers from their own perspective, but the real question is how much do we know? The TALIS 2018 international survey that is designed and administered by the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, is one of those large-scale surveys of unique characteristics. So it covers a wide range of topics. And we clearly, for the purposes of today's session, had to narrow down the focus. And we've opted for discussing some elements that really affect teaching profession as the times are changing, but to focus predominantly on how we can best support continuous professional development of teachers, with some reference clearly on school leaders as well. During the session, I'll try to share with you some of the responses to the pre-webinar questions. We're going to have a couple of quick polls, hopefully, and then we're going to have some time to address your questions that are hopefully prompted by today's presentation. So let's move to the topic of the day. Clearly, there are several drivers behind why we talk about teachers today, and one certainly is the global commitment by the UN member states to provide quality of education to all children by 2030. Luckily, within the UN system, and as the countries continue discussing these objectives, there are some specific teacher-related targets and indicators that were articulated, like do we have enough qualified teachers, or how many teachers actually have an opportunity to have an in-service training annually. So that's something that we have been following through the UN bodies, but also as the world has experienced the shock of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have also experienced the so-called learning losses. So this is not new to any of you. The trouble is that post-COVID, when it comes to learning, there is still a long way to go to get to a full recovery. What worries everybody is if we're able to meet SDG benchmarks, and I'm sorry to say that in the early 2020s already it was clear that that's going to be a very difficult task. Part of the reason is that COVID has taken place, reforms have been slow, but there's a topic that is more and more relevant in today's discussion about teachers, and these are the increasing teacher shortages. I'll say a word or two about that. So before we actually go to the research data from TALIS 2018, I wanted to quickly share with you something that I've named Teacher Union's View to illustrate the scope of teacher shortages. So Education International, which is a global confederation of teacher unions, have, sorry about this, has administered one survey showing that, amazingly enough, across the whole world that we can see here, teacher trade unions are showing exactly the same pattern when it comes to the teacher shortages. And I've highlighted only a few pieces of information for you today, where regardless of the education level or subject area, special education seems to be coming to the forefront of the need for support. Apologies for the cough, I'm fighting a viral infection, so it's going to be repeating, I have to say. Another important guideline is coming from the Global Report on Teachers from UNESCO, published also quite recently, which tells us a complex story, or actually illustrates the size of this challenge by enumerating the number of teachers that are needed by 2030. And I'm just going to try to illustrate what this really means in practice. This complex graph is not something we're going to read together. I would like just to ask you to focus on this last vertical bar that says Sub-Saharan Africa to illustrate the way we can read on this graph. So basically what this graph is saying, that by the year 2030, 37 countries of Sub-Saharan Africa will not be able to close the teacher gap, whereas only 9 will be able to do so. If we apply the same type of reading pattern to the whole diagram, we see that some other regions as well experience the challenge. Bottom line, there is no single global region that is actually going to be able to meet their needs in terms of teacher shortages. So before I actually go to the TALIS 2018 data, I wanted to share with you some key considerations. And this is a plea for all of us in terms of how we can jointly read the data that will be presented today. If we're looking at the first column on this slide, you'll see that some of the data sources I am using today are coming from UN Statistical Division, so the UN data. Then there's TALIS, which is at the core of today's presentation. But I'm also using alternative sources of data, and there was an example of the Trade Union Federation for that. As we know, UN data, they do aim to cover the world, but that's not always possible. Because some of the countries that are UN member states are not capacitated to provide regular supply of national data from their statistical offices. TALIS is very different, obviously, because it's a survey administered by OECD, and OECD is an organization of nearly 40 most developed countries, but also there are other countries who self-select themselves to take part in this survey. So this is a unique survey globally that actually gives directly a possibility to directly hear the voices of teachers and school leaders, which is, for instance, not the case when alternative sources are used, like for trade unions, the respondents were the heads of trade unions, not necessarily teachers working in schools. So we recognize the limitation of TALIS predominantly because it is focusing on the developed global north and not necessarily always on a great number of countries from the global south. But we really like it and appreciate the fact that we can, through this survey, hear what teachers and school leaders believe. So I wanted to make a quick stop here to see if there are maybe some questions to clarify the content that has been shared so far. You're most welcome to ask, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this introduction, for sharing this context, Ivana. So you have presented the context, global context and the nature of data. So until our colleagues join us with their questions, so TALIS is about an international report, and it was produced before the pandemic, right? So this is, I think, one thing we should remember. So your focus was on how the data was generated and who owns it so far.
Correct. Well, thank you very much for this question. This question is really critical because it speaks to the ways we could interpret the data we're looking today. So a little later, it's going to become clear why we're talking about the 2018 data set and not about like 2023, for instance. So there's a certain rhythm of repetition or cycles when data for this specific survey are being collected. So because of the COVID, instead of releasing data in 2023, it was possible only to generate this data during 2024, and the report on this data is coming up very soon. So yes, these data that we're going to see are going to show us pre-pandemic picture, but I want to say also that while we expect significant new trends, we're talking about some of the education system's characteristics and about the teaching force, where changes take time. So we expect a degree of consistency even after pandemic, but there will be some things that I'm going to be referring to during presentation where I think there are not going to be too many surprises. I don't know if we have any questions, or Shirin, you would advise to continue.
Yes, let's continue. I'm sure we will have more
Okay.
slides.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm sure that all of you know for TALIS and know what it is. This is just a quick reminder because we use this abbreviation too much. We're talking about the Teaching and Learning International Survey, a unique survey, as already mentioned, that is asking teachers and school leaders to talk about themselves and about schools where they work. Obviously, the main emphasis is on aspects of their work that affect student learning the most. It is an impressive undertaking simply because more than 250,000 individuals take part in this survey across 15,000 different schools and nearly 50 education systems. As I mentioned earlier, TALIS covers a number of different areas as listed in the third bullet point, but it is important to take a note of the fact that two cross-cutting themes that have been present in more than one cycle are innovation with emphasis on ICT or the use of education technologies, and then equity and diversity. As you will see somewhat later, these topics continue to be of interest during the TALIS 2024 as well. So once this webinar completes, you will be able to get the slides where you will, through clicking on these years, be able to access earlier published work linked to the result of TALIS ever since 2008, if that's what's interesting to you. So let's just quickly go over the topics that are addressed in TALIS 2018. 5 enormous areas or 5 thematic pillars that TALIS 2000 dataset enables us to explore. For today's purposes, we are actually focusing only on one bullet point, and even more specifically, more than anything else, on the continuous professional development of teachers. And then I'll also make some remarks about professional development of school leaders as well. But before we get there, I want to say that even in 2018, some of the big changes in teacher experiences were captured that are still valid today, that remain valid also post-COVID. Now, to what extent there is a difference between pre and post-COVID, we're going to learn in a month or two when the TALIS 2024 data is released. And maybe this is a good exercise and in an introduction into how we can decipher the new data set that's going to become available soon. So I'll skip this slide because it's actually showing something that has been a constant. People engage as teachers because that's not only a profession, it's a vocation, and it's often the first career choice, more often for women than for men. But what's really captured in TALIS 2018 dataset is the fact that time spent on teaching in the classroom is on decline. And this is a global phenomenon. This diagram is an easy way to illustrate that essentially 3/4 of the classroom time that's available to teachers is used for teaching and learning activities, whereas administrative tasks and then keeping order in the classroom take up quite a bit, only nearly a quarter. So a short summary of this graph with some added information is to the left, because there's a concern that administrative tasks are on the increase, and without any shocks, so to say, no surprises there. Keeping order in the classroom is more demanding in primary schools than in secondary schools. So we're not going to go over the whole table. As I said, the idea of slides was to provide more information, but then to focus on a smaller number of pieces of information we have at hand. So I invite you to take a look at the first three columns alone and recognize that in 2018 already, more than half of all teachers in the countries participating in TALIS 2018 had an opportunity to use ICT for teaching in their formal education. However, only 43% back then felt prepared to use ICT for teaching. And then 60% of all teachers surveyed across this data set, they actually also had recent professional development opportunities to learn how to use ICT for teaching. So there's the aspect of ICT that's going to be repeating. The next slide is even more complex, but we're going to dissect it as well. So again, let's not read the two tables that are presented. So the first table is called Teaching Student with Diverse Ability Levels and Needs, and the second, Teaching in Multicultural or Multilingual Settings. There's a major change that's been also noted in the dataset for TALIS 2018, and that is that today's teachers have more than 10% of special needs students in more than a quarter of all cases. That means that every fourth case of classroom entry means that a teacher is going to have to support more than 10 students that have some form of need for additional educational support. The situation is less great, so to say, when it comes to support to kids who speak a different language other than the language of instruction, which is shown on the bottom table, because it's 18% of teachers that experience that in their regular work in 2018. The trouble is that teachers, and we're now looking at the third column, don't feel well prepared for teaching in a mixed ability setting, and that's actually quite a bit, nearly a half, so 44%, whereas they feel somewhat better prepared for teaching in multicultural and multilingual setting. These two different characteristics of the teaching environment, of the school environment, the characteristics of student body, is something that is a major change that is becoming more and more important to be addressed by the education systems. So there's a clear tension that while the time used for teaching in the classroom is going down, there are more and more complex activities that need to be done in parallel by teachers in the classrooms. We need to think about how that could be meant. And clearly, continuous professional development is one of the vehicles to think about these and other issues. So a few introductory reflections on the need to continuously validate and update teacher skills. We have just seen the change that is externally driven can do that to the CPD system in any country. There are numerous reasons, numerous other reasons: migrations, increase of the student body due to demographic transformation, So teachers are continuously monitoring what's happening in the external environment, but they also have to respond to the internal, so to say, changing requirements within the education system, because curriculum can change. This teacher licensing system could change, requiring them to meet certain criteria or standards to be, how shall I say, to be qualified for the work they do. So I am not going to preach to the converted. It's clear that we all value a continuous professional development of education professionals, but it's always good to remind us that CPD is a fundamental element of achieving large-scale reform results in the direction we want to see, that it is something that always, based on data that we have from the past, contribute to high achieving education results. So that's another reason why we want to see it. Obviously, helping students to learn is the key and the primary motivator. That's not up for discussion. In TALIS 2018, dataset helps us go over specific topics, including participation in professional development training, including discussion about different types of development opportunities, discussion about what it means, an impactful training, what a training, how training needs to look like to be considered of influence. Obviously, we need to understand some of the content areas covered, as well as whether those match the actual needs. And there are, as we all know, barriers to get involved in training, and we need to think together about strategy to overcome them. So participation in training is almost universal, but it varies widely from country to country. So this graph, although it's rather busy, is actually quite simple. The sort of middle vertical blue bar that's emphasized is showing OECD average for teachers' participation in professional development activities. And you'll notice that, for instance, France is to the very right with a very low, small bar in comparison to, for instance, Lithuania, that is to the very left. So I'll make a small digression here to make a comment about what this means. So based on TALIS 2018 dataset, we don't really know what that means. That's another limitation of this survey, because it helps us see the snapshot that was taken at a specific moment of time when data was collected. But because of its complexity, it cannot claim that, it's going to clarify causal relationships or show why France has such a low level of participation in professional development activities. We obviously can access, and that's my recommendation, the country notes on the OECD website to look for some of the answers, because we need to understand the country context to be able to respond to these questions. But we can hypothesize, and we can maybe have a discussion, because, for instance, it may be that the participation in professional development activities in France, and I'm not saying that this is true, I am hypothesizing, maybe it's low because, for instance, they have very strong initial education of teachers. And, there's a little need or smaller need to intervene through professional development activities. Again, this is an example without claiming that this is the case. Or it may be that France had made a really big investment in the past 5 years in professional development activities, and this year there's a slow movement in this area. So we need to be careful when we discuss this data, when we try to interpret data. They have a certain purpose and clear limitations. And In the next slide, we're actually going to talk not only about general participation in professional development activities, but about the type of those activities that TALIS 2018 dataset helps us monitor. So at this time, I would ask Shirin, my colleague, if we could kick off the first poll, which basically asks you to answer the question, in your view, what type of training delivery format is most suited for professional development of teachers and school leaders in your country? You can make only one choice, and options that are offered include in-person training taking place outside of school premises, school-embedded or school-based training, and the third option is online training. We have deliberately made this choice mutually exclusive and provided only 3 answers as options. Thank you for voting. I am not able to hear Shirin, so I'm going to make an
yes.
assumption.
Yes,
Okay.
now you can see the results, yes.
So thank you very much. So we have some sort of a split, but stronger tendency towards in-person training taking place outside of school premises. Well, thank you for your responses. Let us go to the next slide, where we continue discussion about professional development, but this time including the type of professional development attended by teachers and principals. Again, I invite you not to read all the options, but just to try to see what exactly these horizontal bars in different colors mean. So the horizontal bars that are marked light blue are showing us the percentage of teachers who participated in the real life professional development activities in the year before they actually responded to TALIS questions. Whereas the gray bars are the percentage of principals who participated in professional development activities. All of those professional activities are listed on the left-hand side of this diagram. In order not to go into too many details, I've summarized the top 3 options or types of professional development that were available or used by teachers on the one hand and school leaders on the other, where we can see that in this case, in case of teachers, very similar to your responses, courses, seminars attended in person are the number 1 preferred option. Reading professional literature is the second, and then education conference is the third. Even though the order of these types of professional development activities is different for school leaders, they appear to be the same, with clearly school leaders as, how shall we say, frontline workers, those who represent the school. They more often attend conferences, and clearly this is an opportunity to network, so they also significantly more frequently participate in the work of professional networks. So from there, I wanted, and I mean, giving account of descriptive data is not easy. So I'd appreciate if you could make notes on the side, and maybe, if you have any interesting controversial question to ask at the end, I would be grateful. So the most impactful training. The most impactful training, and I'll try to, in a way, present this as simple as possible. It's a busy slide. Again, intention is to leave you with more information written on the slide, but I don't really want to discuss the whole thing. Impactful training in the language of TALIS 2018 is actually perceived through three different elements: improved teaching practices in the follow-up to the professional development activity, the sense of confidence or self-efficacy of teachers, and by that, in TALIS, this is defined as classroom management, instruction and student engagement, and then job satisfaction. So these are the three elements that TALIS 2018 researchers were operationalizing as the most impactful training. And it doesn't come as a surprise that the three are related. So for all those teachers, and there's a really high percentage of teachers who see positive impact of professional development on their teaching practices, all of these teachers at the same time have higher sense of confidence and the sense of job satisfaction. I think that the countries participating in TALIS 2018 are seriously, how shall I say, in a good position, because in 3/4 of all surveyed teachers in all TALIS participating countries, teachers see the value of attending these trainings. I'm not sure if this is the case in all countries globally. So again, it's not easy to find a modality that is going to be convincing for teacher, and it's difficult to identify the most effective professional development options that will serve the purpose. But it appears that teachers have a very clear idea about what works for them. So again, this complex graph is showing some of the key characteristics of effective professional development in the view of teachers who were surveyed. Again, the gray box on the left is summarizing the top three, and I ask us all to focus on that. Top three characteristics important to teachers when it comes to their own professional development. They require, and this is what they give to their students, by the way, that those trainings build on the teachers or on their own prior knowledge. It's interesting that in terms of active learning and collaboration, they really like, obviously, to see how that works in the classroom. They like the element of practicality. They like experiential learning. They want to apply new ideas in their classrooms and learn through that experience. And clearly, they prefer those professional development opportunities that are in line with their professional development needs. This is self-explanatory, the last, I would say. We're going to come to the needs a little bit later, so maybe just having this on the side as a thought saved, it would be maybe good. So from the school leader's perspective, effective teacher training means almost the same, but there are some specific, how shall I say, accents, or there's an emphasis, slightly different emphasis. So school leaders, when asked about what they think that is effective teacher training, so not their own, but effective teacher training, they see that collaboration among teachers within the school premises, within the school as a learning environment, this is something that they notice. Obviously, there are enormous regional variations. In some countries, that's going to be 20%, in others 50%, but across OECD, on average, 26 or more than a quarter of principals report a high need for professional development in this aspect when it comes to collaboration or collaborative learning among teachers. So, I mean, it doesn't come as a surprise, since the practice, but also the research supports the fact that collaborative work at school level, it's important for teachers to achieve their objectives, to become stronger instructional leadership, and maybe to prompt a more active engagement or agenda setting for professional development within the school. So being a passive recipient or the mandated, ministry mandated courses, or taking things in your hands by engaging in your local professional learning community, maybe collaborating peer-to-peer with different schools. There are different options. But again, it is important to say that we don't want to say that ministries of education shouldn't have an agenda when providing professional development opportunities. What we want to say that there is a split in responsibility between the central authorities and the teachers and school leaders as the key school level actors and those who work directly with kids and parents in their communities. So again, this slide is going to stay with you. We're not going to read it together. Please don't go into too many details. The next slide is going to summarize the main highlights, but I just want us to understand what we're going to be talking about. So the light blue bar is showing the percentage of teachers for whom some of the topics were included in their professional development activities. So it's showing basically that me as a teacher in the past 12 months, I attended, for instance, 3 courses, and those courses had these titles. So these were the topics. So this is the past, this is what's happened. Whereas the horizontal gray bar is showing the need for professional development of the same teachers. So basically, we have asked them, or OECD has asked them, what is that you have benefited from in the past, but what is that you need? So there's a way to sort of initiate discussion around this. And let me show you this next slide, where what was the light blue bar in the previous slide. I'm showing the top 3 topics, or most frequently present professional development activities for the teachers surveyed in 2018. I don't think that this is going to come as a shock. It's like a very traditional approach. So it's the knowledge of my subject area, pedagogical competencies, is the student assessment, and at the 4th, actually, I squeezed it in, the knowledge of the curriculum. These are the building blocks, right, of the teacher education and I mean, knowledge. But the thing is, we wanted really to see how what's been experienced by the teachers is related to what teachers today need or think they need the most. So based on the responses back in 2018, and my expectation and hypothesis is that this hasn't changed, will not be changed in TALIS 2024, teachers need somewhat different type of professional development activities. So this is teachers' view. This is their statement. This is not a researcher assessment. So they need more support when teaching students with special needs. So this is not the first time that we're recognizing this. Even though there's a lot of ICT offer, it still appears not to be sufficient. So we may have an issue of the quality of ICT offer. We don't know based on the data we have. But again, the third topic of special interest for teachers is teaching in a multicultural or multilingual setting. And they more and more are faced with these new types of challenges. Or maybe these challenges aren't new, but they're growing in terms of importance. So this is then, a good kind of segue to saying that we have to think about these issues when we think about how we are addressing the shortage of teachers with these kind of competencies. And we know that shortage is becoming a very, very big problem, not only in the countries that have low or middle income, sort of lower GDP, but in richer countries as well. So I'm going to have to skip this slide to save a little bit of time and maybe come to a topic or slide where I'm not going to share anything new, because everybody who's attending, I'm sure, has personally experienced the challenges of similar kind, and it seems that across different education systems, these challenges are roughly the same. So this graph is presenting the percentage of teachers who have experienced barriers to access professional development, but also principals, those are the gray bars, who have experienced barriers on their side, barriers to joining professional development activities. It doesn't come again as a big surprise that the conflicts in time schedule, so the regular teaching work or school leadership work, sometimes it's difficult to align with the timetable for professional development. I mean, we can always ask if it's fair to ask teachers to take a weekend for professional development activities or stay for the whole day in school to just do that. Can we do something about their teaching schedule to facilitate this? So that's one, for instance, idea to talk about. The second persistent cause and the barrier to participation in training is clearly incentives to participate. And there are mixed reports from different countries and obviously cultural contexts, where, for instance, incentives are linked. Let me get to a good example. For instance, professional development could be a condition for career advancement, or it could be a factor for salary increase, or more basically could be a prerequisite for acquiring a teaching license. But there are some countries where none of that is required, and the systems, education systems, rely on initiative coming from the teacher. And you're not going to believe, but this is happening in countries that are very different, that have very different challenges in education, very different level of funding that's available. It's just something that may require a little more digging to help us understand why having or not having incentives is useful. Professional development of teacher is always expensive. It is expensive to teachers and school leaders to pay on their own. But sometimes, for different reasons, they have to, again, if that's a condition for any of the previously discussed things, like a license or career progression or any of those things. So the main discussion, I guess, isn't really going to be, as we go forward, about what the barriers to participation in training are, but the mechanisms that we can use to remove those barriers. And then before I go to that, I want to say that in the countries surveyed by TALIS 2018, despite of all barriers, more than 3/4 of all teachers participated in at least one professional development activity in the year before that. So what about mechanisms to actually remove barriers that we've discussed? So you're going to find only some that were prioritized by teachers surveyed in 2018, but in your countries, obviously, situation may be very different. So according to teachers and school leaders from TALIS 2018, three most frequently mentioned support mechanisms they require are exactly what I try to phrase in a different language or in different words. So they need to be released from teacher duties during regular working hours to be able to have a good life-work balance, to be able to have mental capacity to carry the activities. So there needs to be a certain strategy agreed with educational authorities, school leaders as the school level authority, and obviously teachers within a school have a way to share the burden of teaching. So there is something there worth discussing going forward. Material needed for activities, the second important for teachers in TALIS 2018. And then, no surprise again, cost is always an issue, even in the most developed countries of OECD. So what is really interesting, and again, we have no way of assessing the reasons behind this, that the least mentioned option, or the smallest number of teachers, mentioned the increase of salary as a way to stimulate or incentivize their attendance or participation in continuous professional development. And that was done in only 10% of the cases. So we are really coming to the end of this presentation that took a little longer than I was hoping for. But I really wanted to share at the end some reflections and questions, because I also have a lot of questions, and I wish I could get some of the reflections or answers from you. So in a way, this is going to highlight some of the sections of this presentation, but it may also highlight or give you my perspective on what could be the topics for discussion going forward. And all that I'm going to say in this slide actually is going to be tested with the TALIS 2024 data. Let's see if the data also show that this is still important. So again, I think that it's never too much to say again that it's really important to understand how data is collected, how it is generated, who owns data, what's the purpose for which the data is collected. That's the only way for us to understand how we can make sense of that data, understand its limitations and difference in comparison to other data, how much we can trust them. So again, I am today giving my personal account about something that's been designed by a group of people long ago. I am aware that some of my views could be contested, and I invite your reflections there. I just want to say that we could engage in a dialogue simply because this data is potent in the way of, like, it doesn't really give all the answers. I think that one good thing that we can dispute is that TALIS 2018 data has once again helped us recognize the changing realities in teacher lives, because their classrooms are becoming more diverse, and they are the only ones to address this challenge. The technology that's helping deliver some of the content that's helping teaching is putting also a burden on teachers, because it requires ever new ICT skills, because ICT is a very dynamic area of development. There again, teachers' time is under pressure. And then teachers appear to have the need to work more collaboratively, to have venues or structures within the school where they could share the learning and experiences, potentially mutually correcting each other and helping each other with relatively limited resources. Again, for that, they need time. And again, all of these changes that are putting pressure on teachers' time actually come at the time when classroom time for delivery of teaching is even further reduced because of the increasing administrative tasks. Let's not forget about that, as well as the need to keep order in the classroom. And, you know, we don't really know how big classroom we're talking about in TALIS 2018, but with demographic explosion in certain areas in the world, it is not difficult to imagine one teacher with 40 or 50 kids to be managed. So challenges are real and they are serious. There has to be a systemic way of addressing them. One thing that is directly linked to the continuous professional development offer is really what guides the offer at country level. I think that this is the critical topic for all of us, whether and in what way teachers and school leaders are included in establishing priorities for their own training. So I think that that's one important element for the dialogue within every country with education authorities, but I mean, school level actors, so teachers and school leaders have to be part of this dialogue. How school leaders can best support professional development is another question. I mean, I am aware of research where school leaders are seen as key barriers to access to professional development, which is not something that's popped up in TALIS 2012. It could be because of the country coverage, but there could be other reasons, obviously, as well. How can school leaders support professional development? Well, there's not only one way and not all teachers are the same. So supporting novice teachers and supporting senior teachers is not going to be different. Do our countries have answer to these questions? That's something to think about as well. What constitutes an effective professional development course for teachers is, again, a question, because like whether we will follow the definition by TALIS 2018 or have another way to measure training effectiveness. That's something that's bothering me, because in the area where I work, school leadership, it's not very easy to measure the effect of professional development support to school leaders, for instance. All ideas very welcome. And finally, going back to one of the key, well, this is not a dilemma. I think that this could be seen also as a point that CPD as a responsibility should be in a way shared between education authorities and school level actors as education professionals. And not necessarily shared in the same proportion, but it certainly needs to be negotiated. So how is that education authorities can get views and information about what teachers and school leaders need, and how can they act on their behalf? That's another question that I want to leave you with for today. That said, I'm going to close this presentation and, you know, essentially do some small PR for OECD for free, because TALIS 2024 is going to be released soon, and we'll be able to sort of compare this data from 2018 with the new data set. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ivana, for raising awareness of the global issues and for pointing out also the limitations of the report. This not only gives us a clear picture of the challenges of the context, but also helps us understand more in terms of data interpretation, so we can make more informed use of such findings on our own work. And we have received so many questions, so I hope I will be able to communicate them clearly. So previously you mentioned that in the TALIS report, it clearly shows gaps between training and teachers' sense of preparedness. For example, they have ICT training, 50%, 56% have had ICT training, but only 43 felt prepared for the use of ICT. In the same way, they received training in multicultural classrooms, but only 26 felt well prepared. Do you think that this suggest this current training is not adequately preparing teachers, or have you seen any other changes post-pandemic or since COVID?
Okay. Well, thanks very much. I mean, this is also a question. I mean, based on data that is available not only from TALIS 2018, but other research that is actually scattered, so we can't really draw conclusions in the same way we can describe what's happening in education systems participating in this large-scale survey. In my view, for the use of education technologies, the answer is fairly simple. The need is enormous, but the pace at which education technologies get integrated into daily lives of schools and, teachers and school leaders as key professionals in these premises, I think that creates the challenge. I mean, we have been witnessing proliferation of various learning platforms, learning systems, ways of tracking grades. We're talking about apps doing incredible things. So I think that at this time, I mean, we are actually putting too much in front of teachers and school leaders, asking them to make choices of things they will be using. And it is difficult sitting within a classroom or a small school in rural area to make all the decisions, and maybe, sometimes experiencing also connectivity issues or, computer facing some old hardware. So I think that part of the reason is that the technology is changing too fast. It is difficult to actually, as education authorities, you also can't keep up the pace with the change of technology. By the time you articulate the guidelines or you sort of prepare an amendment to the piece of legislation, the hardware is new. There are new ways of doing things in the virtual space, for instance. So I think this is a battle that's going to stay with us for a long time. But for the multicultural classrooms and multilingual classrooms, I think that challenge is really something that is difficult to articulate as an answer. It's a really, really complex situation. So I would add to that teaching of kids with multiple levels of ability. So the complexity in a classroom is such that you as a teacher could today enter the classroom where you have, for instance, let's say 25 children, where two have, for instance, a learning disability or a mild or learning difficulty, and then like 5 kids who come from different ethnic or linguistic or some other background and are not speaking your language, the language in which you are teaching. So how do you manage a classroom of 25 when the kids attending the lessons you teach have very different ways of acquiring knowledge, different channels through which they can get your message when they don't speak the language or, poorly speak the language. So adjusting teaching approaches, providing additional support to these very specific individual needs, this is all something that is, again, causing additional work, and teachers, as we have seen, are not prepared. Part of the reason why teachers are not prepared is obviously these issues were not priority issues at the time when some of the teachers, and we know the teachers in these countries are relatively old. Those are not the topics that were part of education, formal education at the time when today's teachers went to school or to the university. But the world has changed and new topics are coming to the forefront. there is also a really important, again, globally pushed for, and I wholeheartedly supported, inclusive education policy. So we're not talking about special schools. We're now talking about regular schools where teachers are working with kids who have certain difficulties, or sometimes, as I mentioned, mild disabilities. They're not all necessarily trained to do that, but usually countries where inclusive education gets introduced at national level provide professional development support for this. So things have been changing. There are new challenges. It's going to take a long time, I expect, for the whole teacher body, let's use that ugly phrase, to get acquainted with all different dimensions and elements of this picture. It's only natural, in my view.
Yes, thank you, well, for this comprehensive answer. So in terms of the training that teachers, school leaders already receive, so there is a gap also in terms of what teachers think they need and what evidence from practice suggests they actually need. So these are the things also to consider, right? As school leaders, what would be the implications? So should they how can they identify the real needs? Because it's also you mentioned teachers initiate. When teachers
Yeah.
initiate, it's
Yeah.
impactful.
Well, again, thanks very much, because this is like my favorite part of the presentation, like the tension that I really like to think about. And I mean, it's not an easy, I mean, again, I'm going to give my take based on insights from other research, not necessarily from TALIS. So I am not, or I wasn't very much surprised learning that teachers and school leaders typically attend a certain type of professional development activities, simply because in every education system, the priority of education authorities are going to be to make the most important, like the building blocks, right. So education authorities are not wrong for insisting on the subject knowledge, on pedagogy, on certain elements that, whatever happens, need to be in place. But when it comes to keeping up with the changes that are experienced in schools and classrooms, so, the life that's happening around the school, and it's putting pressure on, all education professionals within the school. Sometimes this is about capacity. It takes a long time to reach consensus at policy level, so like within the ministries, about what should be prioritized, because as we see, ICT is a very complex challenge. Multilingual, multi-ethnic, like it's a very complex area. So what is more important? How to approach it? And that's really not an easy task to get to. So the problem is capacity sometimes of education authorities, but again, it's the complexity of the topics that need to be handled. And, teachers are going to be always the first to recognize the problem because they live it. So, I mean, it's only natural that this dialogue between policy and school needs to be constant to make sure that we capture the needs early on, so that we give ourselves time to respond to those again as fast as possible.
Yes, absolutely. So this maybe bring us understanding the context by making it more evidence-based in some way in the school, so that we can build around these. So one other question is, I think actually three of our participants shared similar concerns. So for example, one of them is that in my context, Cameroon, there is a lot of apathy for CPD for teachers. Or another question how do you get teachers motivated to stay? So there is a problem of teachers being reluctant to try new things. Another question is, how do we change the perception of teachers who are considering CPD as politically driven idea? So on the one hand, teachers, you mentioned teachers receive training, similar types of training where peer collaboration was, I think, not taken so much. But on the other hand, there are some barriers for teacher educators also to encourage teachers to take part, to be more active. What are your opinions around this? How can we encourage or motivate teachers in those difficult contexts?
Yeah. Well, one can write a book by trying to answer these questions. So, yeah, the little appetite for professional development, or it's another way to say that there's a low motivation to participate. So we've discussed like what constitutes the key barriers according to the TALIS 2018 finding, as well as some ideas about how that could be addressed. Well, I guess that, again, in my view, we can't leave school level actors to answer the major questions, because education, among other things, is a system of horizontally or hierarchically organized institutions with certain division of mandates. So I think that we all have to become advocates with the central authorities when it comes to decisions that define lives of teachers and school leaders, like how their time, their working hours are used. So is there a way to dedicate a couple of hours for professional development, that people are excused from providing classes at that time? That's an example that's, exists in other countries. Or can we, because we can't always rely only on somebody else to resolve our problem, can we work within our professional community in our own school premises on creating knowledge, on, provoking, how shall I say, this inquiry into new that could be helpful going forward, how senior teachers would support novice teachers. Again, there needs to be some kind of recognition in this process. I mean, it's very hard for me to explain, to say how to motivate teachers. I mean, we've seen based on TALIS 2018 data that paying school teachers to go to attend professional development, sometimes it's not working. So again, we need to dig deeper into country context. We all know that no country has, no two countries have the same education system. So conditions vary. We can't, on the other hand, rely on, intrinsic motivation. I mean, all teachers are already, this is why they're doing this job. They have a motivation to be in that classroom. But how to sustain motivation over the years with very little support or level of financing, or the lack to understand why is this policy guidance missing for the past 15 years. So that's something that, again, requires, I believe, a wider dialogue. I forgot to answer the last part of the question, the previous question about school leaders, like how school leaders can help. I mean, again, this is a really very big question that requires a lot of time. But again, if we draw from findings from TALIS 2018, it looks like that more and more school leaders are ready to create space for themselves and their teachers to work on collaborative school projects, to identify challenges, try to find solutions, connect horizontally with other schools. So that's another option that we mustn't forget.
Thank you. You also mentioned that horizontal schools connecting with each other. So you are highlighting that it shouldn't be only school embedded, but with different schools sharing practice. So maybe communities of practice within that school, within that school culture, but expanded and different schools coming together in different ways to share practice. So
Professional development communities such as this one, but within, with a different set of actors. That's another way of going forward, I guess.
yes, so many ways, but I believe school leaders have a role leading, because those communities also, professional learning networks need leaders, somebody to lead, at least at the beginning, in the initial stages. So thank you so much, Ivana, for this session. It's been really it's a very difficult to understand the report initially, but with your presentation, everything has been really clear, and we've had some ideas. So I hope everyone, you also found the session useful, insightful. And please remember to read the TALIS report. We will also upload a document with all the publications and reports Ivana mentioned in her slides. So thank you so much once again.
Thank you very much for your time and patience with me. Have a good day.
Thank you. And a bit, some more reminders, colleagues. So please follow our newsletter. You will receive the recording as well as a link to the next month's webinar. And yes, so you will receive a survey from us. This will include a link to a feedback form. And then once you complete the form, you will be able to download your certificate of attendance, and the recording of the webinar and the slides will be available on Teaching English in the next couple of days. And don't forget to register for our next webinar, which is on 21st of October on e-moderation skills, becoming an e-moderator, skills for the future. So finally, we very much hope to see you all again in the future sessions. And thank you once again for your great questions.